welcome to another episode of this podcast. Today we're going to talk about switches. And no, I don't mean internet switches or keyboard switches, because I have no interest in them. They are good as they are. Today we're going to talk about electric switches versus mechanical switches. It's been quite a few years now that most of the companies that produce devices are switching completely to electrical switches, or in today's days, they're mostly called digital switches, which are less reliable and less secure. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, let's start with the mechanical switches, which is a plate touching a physical plate, and they are done manually. There is so many types of those switches which are mechanical, and a few of them to mention are the single pole, single throw, single pole, double throw, double pole, single throw, double pole, double throw, two pole, six throw, momentary operation switches, which are through pressure, temperature, toggle switches. No, not toggle as in software toggle switch, but actual toggle switch, which are commonly used in household applications to turn on and off appliances, and which has a lever which we can move up or down to turn on and off, which means to open or close the circuit. And then you have the rotary switches, which you see in some radios a lot of times, that when you click the switch to the complete left, you hear a click that turns off the device, and if you turn it to the right, it turns on the device. That means that there are two plates that are connecting and disconnecting, which means it's making a physical contact that when it is off, it is truly off, as it's the case with all the mechanical switches, which indeed are a rare thing to see these days. And the reason is not exactly how it's explained by a lot of engineers, and I know I will have probably some comments coming up there saying that they are not different from the physical or so-called mechanical switches. And let me tell you right away that when you turn off your laptop, there are actual ways to turn it back on without touching the power button, because most of the newer devices that are being made today, especially the ones that are turned off mostly with the software commands, they don't truly turn off. They go into hibernation or sleep state, which means next time you hit that keyboard or even plug the power to them, they turn on right away, because the switch is not doing its job, because it can never do its job properly. And a perfect case for that is in some certain laptops. For example, let's say the laptop is completely off, and when you plug in the cord, the laptop turns without you pressing any single button. What that is that the switch, the power switch, is electrical. It's not mechanical, because with a mechanic switch, you can plug in the power to that device and it will never turn it on. It will only start charging the battery, but it will not touch the system to be turned on without you explicitly wanting to turn it on physically. And that is extremely safe, especially when it comes to surges, which are a lot of power surges in a lot of states, and even here in the United States. And I'm not even talking about the rest of the world, that some countries unfortunately have electricity go in and out and all that stuff and go up and down from 220 that some countries work on. The electricity drops to 150, then it goes back to 300. Sometimes that electrical switch will actually damage the device. And not to talk about lightning strikes in close proximity. And no, I'm not talking striking directly on the device, because that's hopefully is something that never happens to you or any of us. But if it strikes nearby, now the power system will actually deliver too much power to your motherboard, and it will melt down that electrical switch, which is usually less than safe, as I said on the beginning, because now it's not two plates going away from each other and kinda lowering the possibility of a spark or a jump. And now you are relying on a relay, MOSFET, bipolar transistor, power diode, and all those beautiful things. And I can list a few switches that I disagree with, because they are less than safe for devices, and I'll give you more examples of devices just in a minute, but let me give you a list of switches that are used commonly today, starting from your phone to your computer to your dishwasher to your refrigerator. And I'm always talking about the modern devices. I'm not talking about the older devices that are actually solid built. Commonly used, especially with cars, is relays that we all know what they are. Bipolar transistors, power diodes, MOSFETs, or which means metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistor, which is quite a mouthful of a name. IGBTs, insulated gate bipolar transistors, SCRs, silicon controlled rectifiers. Those are just a few common or commonly used electrical switches, which, in my opinion, as a technician, being quite a few years in this field, I would say at least 10 to 15 years I've been doing this. And yes, I've worked with electronics and electric. Fortunately or not, I've had to do both. And what I've noticed, most of the devices that actually burn out are the devices who are using electrical or electronic switches. And the reason being is that the motherboard is only sleeping and it's not turning off because that switch was not designed to turn it off. And if you've noticed, and I have 100% noticed myself, especially with the new TVs. Let's say I have a TV which is not the most expensive you ever seen. It's a Vizio, a 75-inch Vizio. When you turn it off, it's not really turned off. Actually, you can turn it back on just by other devices that are connected with it with a CEC. And CEC, yes, it's a feature that makes things a little bit more comfortable because, of course, everything is ease of use, but we forget about the security completely because, you know, if it's easy, I'll buy it. And that's the wrong mindset. That is extremely wrong. If you respect devices and you want them to live longer, and if you are somebody that's ultra rich and don't mind replacing devices as long as a mega corporation says jump and buy this new one, well, good, more power to you. Go buy the new one because it has extra colors, because nothing else. But for the rest of us, which is the majority of the world, that buy a device and we want it to work a few years at least, we want to get some life out of it, especially if I'm paying over $1,000, I want some life out of it. And I don't expect it to be something that the first time my electricity goes up or down, that device just goes out. It's completely done. So the best way to do that, I respect some devices that implement relays and physical switches or mechanical switches, because I know I expect some of you in the comments to come and say, oh, well, it's impossible to turn the new sensitive and ultra sensitive devices with a physical switch because you'll damage it. Well, let me tell you something. First of all, you are not aware of how electronics work at all. Based on that comment, if you comment that, that's a preemptive strike right here. Look, it's doable. A lot of devices that are companies who are respectable and respectful, they implement this one. It's called the dual switch motherboards. You have an internal switch which is made either by a MOSFET or a relay or whatnot, that when you hit, for example, shutdown, the soft power off, it shuts down the motherboard, then disconnects that MOSFET or that relay. Then on top of it, you have a physical switch now that disconnects that relay, which is on the entry point of the power, from the power itself. So now you have two power sources to disconnect your circuit. No matter what happens with the electricity around you, that device has 99% more chances of surviving a surge, surviving lightning, surviving lights going up and down, and all that good stuff from burning it or have undesired outcomes from it. So yes, it is very doable. In my own computer, which I paid almost $2,000, yes, it was pre-built because I found a great deal back in 2019, and no, I'm not planning to change it. It's a beautiful computer made by Cyber. It has nice GPU and all that good stuff. One thing it did not have was a physical switch. It had that touch button that convinces you that the computer is off, but that's not true. And yes, I understand when you shut down the computer, some of the devices inside, especially the BIOS and all that, have to keep staying alive. But that's not the case. That's why you have a BIOS battery inside all your computers. When that battery dies, you just replace it and that's it. That even if that computer is without power for months, most of the times those batteries will keep enough because we're talking about milliwatts that are required to keep the BIOS alive. So now what I did with my computer of almost $2,000, I know for some of you $2,000 might be nothing, less than a RTX graphics card, but for me it's money. I took it apart, and instead of the capacitive touch, which is good for absolutely nothing, I had to replace it with a physical touch. One of those that you would call spring-loaded, that just to look a little bit better. But if I'm being honest, I wouldn't mind it even if it looked like my wall switches for the electricity. As long as my device is protected and functions properly, I could care less about the looks of it because I'm not trying to do parades or beauty pageants with my computer. I paid money for it and I expect it to work. It's been working since 2019 and I expect it to work at least till 2025. And yes, call me whatever you want. I refuse to update every year just because the company wants me to, and unless they're willing to share their revenue for the new devices with me, then maybe I'll take part in it. But until I take a part of their revenue with me home, I'm planning to use my devices for a few years. I still run a Samsung Note 20 Ultra because it works, and I have no reasons to switch it. No pun intended here. That phone is just working. And now the new devices are coming out as convenient as possible for you to use, but totally forget about the safety. And yes, I'm talking about the physical safety. We always talk about the cybersecurity and viruses, malware, and all that. But how about the physical safety of that device? How about that part? Now, there was a PinePhone, or I think it was called PinePhone. I'm not very sure about that. You can correct me on this if you want to. That actually had physical switches on the back, which means it is possible to implement physical micro switches on cell phones. And yes, that whole thing with phones don't even come now with a removable battery because we are protecting you. You can tell that to somebody who's never touched electronics and never took them apart. You cannot tell that to me, because I will never buy it. I know it's not true. I know it's a PR stunt, and I know why it's done, but I'm not gonna touch in detail on that topic because most of us already know why these phones are made the way they are made. And no, it's not waterproofing, because you can reach waterproofing with having a removable battery in 2023. And right after this break, we will return and talk more about this topic. Welcome back. So I'm gonna start with a prime example of my own. It was a refrigerator that's, I think at the time, was almost $4,000. An LG, the newer ones with Wi-Fi and all that, despite me never turning on that Wi-Fi on it. The weather was bad, okay? It was thunderstorms and all that. Turned off the refrigerator. I did not unplug it, which that one is on me. But let me put the point back to why it's LG's fault here too. We have to share that fault. Meaning that when the power surges and all that happened, and most of the time you have no control over that unless you go turn every switch one by one. When that happened, I didn't really notice any smell or anything because there was nothing going on. Well, the storms went away and all that good stuff. Tried to turn on the fridge. It turned on, but never ever froze or kept cool again since that day. What happened? Checked on the back of the board. The relay that was supposed to turn off the power to the switch had melted, and somehow the capacitor had melted and shorted to the ground, which is very interesting that somehow it bypassed the relay that's put at the compressor down on the bottom and somehow managed to damage the compressor. So now please, can you explain to me how now that soft switch, which is a capacitive button, did the job on this refrigerator, $4,000 refrigerator, that's there just collecting dust now because LG is too beautiful to cooperate with their 10-year warranty, which is not exactly true. Tell me how that switch now protected my fridge. It did not. Had it had a physical switch after the relay, as I explained previously, probably the fridge would still be working today, to this day. But it's not, and it never worked ever since. And yes, there was a lot of food that went bad because of convenience. Because now we are so lazy that we cannot even press a physical switch. Now we are all bound to a Wi-Fi, and if the Wi-Fi goes out, we have no reasons to live anymore. The world should just end and we lay down and wait for the end of the day. That's not how it should work. The physical switch is something that's as vital to that device as the power itself. They should go hand to hand. And furthermore, the other problem was I have a Xiaomi box, one of the boxes that I probably even tested here on one of the videos. When you click turn off on the remote, it looks like it turns it off, right? Wrong. It does not. Sometimes now that device, I connected to the router and I was checking for traffic. Surprise, surprise, now the device, and no, that's not just because it's a Xiaomi, because it happened exactly the same way to my Nvidia Shield. Check the traffic. Somehow the device without any light on, which is presumably supposed to be off, now it was having traffic go through it. It was doing upload and download. Well, granted in a few kilobytes, but a device that's turned off has no business of transferring any data. I mean zero. But somehow it was managing to transfer data back and forth. Both of them. How is that explained? But if it had a physical switch now, that would not happen, because the switch cuts off the power to the motherboard and there's no chance for anything to turn back on because it's a physical switch. And if you're thinking, will Omnitech add a physical switch to those boxes? You're absolutely right. I am, because I'm tired of these devices being on when I don't want them to turn on. And no, it's not back to the point of, well, they're made like that and the engineers know something. Engineers are human beings, just like me and you. And I don't think they're more engineered than I am either. And I'm telling you how it works. You put the soft relay inside, or MOSFET, or toggle, or whatever you want to put inside, and add a mechanical switch on the outside as well. So now, when you hit shutdown, whether relay or bipolar transistor or power diode or MOSFET or whatever you have, turns it off, and the power switch cuts off the power from the diode itself and the circuit and all that good stuff without getting in a whole loop talk that I'm doing, I feel right now, to the switches. It is a little bit embarrassing that we are in 2023 and we have learned nothing. Don't expect mega corporations to take care of you and your devices. Do not expect that. It's not gonna happen. They're there to make money. You are there to buy cheaper. You are there to make it last for years. They are there to sell you 10 of them a year. So now you have to find a balance, and sometimes you just have to hunt for the right device that has what you require to have in it. So some of the devices that were my choices, they have physical switches or mechanical switches on them because that's how it should work. Electrical switches or digital switches are nothing more than a disaster waiting to happen. And if you can prove me wrong, please bring your evidence in the comments below and I will be more than happy to take a look at it, because I've seen more MOSFETs, power diodes, bipolar transistors, relays, and all that stuff burned than I have ever seen any physical switch burn. Especially if that switch is paired with a relay inside, that makes that device bulletproof. Now you have a real working device that the power surges and all that stuff have less chances of burning it out and damaging it. I actually miss the old computers that had physical switches, and a lot of the newer ones, for example, are turning now the power supply units or the PSU into having one without a switch. How is that possible? How do you have a power supply unit without a physical switch? Mine has one there too, because I made sure it has that. It's a 650 watt power supply unit and it has a physical switch on the back of it. The switch that I added is for the motherboard, which yes, goes from the power supply unit to that switch than in the motherboard. So the bottom point of this whole talk here is that I would like to see more companies bringing back the physical or mechanical switches. You saw the switch that was used on that ONN TV. I'm not sure if you watched my video a few videos ago, actually, that I repaired. It was the switch itself that actually was causing the TV to turn on and off, on and off, on and off, go through a lot of uses and all that, because it's a multi-use switch, which you can use that same switch to power on and off, but you can use it to go through the menu and all that. That doesn't work. It's too complex, and it just has more failure points. What's the point of having that kind of switch that will break down when the whole purpose of that switch is made when your remote control breaks down? So now remote control doesn't work and the switch doesn't work. So now you're left with nothing. You can't use that TV. Luckily enough, yes, I took it off completely and I plan to replace it, but right now I'm not even having time to do that. I'm just gonna replace it with a regular on and off switch from the two legs that go with a power, the positive, and that's all. I'm gonna get rid of the whole part that does menus and all that. If the remote is broken, I'm not getting up and switching the channels with that remote, because I don't really use that TV with what it has inside. I use the boxes anyway, so there's no reason for that TV to be used in that way. And I just wanted to touch on this topic because a lot of people are not really informed on this whole silent transition of what the producers of these devices are doing. They're turning everything into electronic switches or the soft shutdowns without us even noticing, because that's kind of the least thing you notice, but somehow it's the primary thing that you use on that device. Without power, that device is useless. So I just hope you got something out of this podcast, and I tried to make it a little bit shorter this time than last one. And with that said, please hit like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Bye!